help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.
My name is Sierra Schaefer. I'm the editorial director of Lifestyle at Outside, and it is such a pleasure to be here in this nice air-conditioned room today with you all to kick off this conversation between two absolute legends. I do not say that lightly. These are women who have pushed limits, built community, and used their platforms for something so much bigger than just their own accomplishments. Melissa Arnot Reid has spent her life in the mountains as a guide, an educator, and a history maker. She was the first American woman to summit and descend Everest without the use of supplemental oxygen. Her new memoir, Enough, peels back the layers behind such achievements, but it's not just a climbing story, it's a really human story that's very bold, vulnerable, and at times unflinchingly honest. She shares moments that are hilarious, heartbreaking, and deeply reflective. And I think as the title says so much, I am enough, I have done enough, also I've had enough. And I think that hits home for anyone who's ever found themselves in the crux of a big outdoor moment, whether it's on skis, in the mountains, on a bike, facing that edge between pushing forward or pulling the plug. Because I think knowing your limits and acting on them is also an act of bravery. Melissa is also the co-founder of the Juniper Fund, which supports families of high-altitude workers who have lost their lives in the mountains, which is just one example of how she's showing up for the communities she's part of. She's joined today by another incredible woman, Rebecca Rusch. Many of you know Rebecca's name from her dominance in endurance sports. She is a 4-time Leadville 100 champ, mountain bike Hall of Famer. But what you might not know is that she started out as a climber, with first female ascents on El Cap and a stint co-owning a climbing gym. Rebecca is also a founder of the Be Good Foundation, which utilizes the bike as a tool for healing and change, supporting initiatives ranging from trail restoration to trauma recovery. I'm so excited to hear what these two have to say today, and if you find yourself wanting to share this conversation with friends who are not here today, which I think you will, the good news is the conversation will be featured on an upcoming episode of Rebecca's podcast, What's the Rush? So, without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to the stage, Melissa Arnot Reid and Rebecca Rusch.
Thank you. Thank you. Air conditioning.
Well, I got chills back there listening to your intro and my intro, and it is such an honor to talk to you. I have Melissa's book that I've read, and I showed it to her. It's got highlight pages and dog ears and all sorts of great stuff in there, and it's such an honor. This is the very first audience episode of What's the Rush podcast, and the concept of the conversations are about talking to amazing people like Melissa, climbing Everest, doing all these great things, but the gist of it is talking about what happens in the stillness and the internal exploration that these explorers experience when they take a minute to actually reflect and look inside and think about the journey and what does the journey really mean. And so it's such an honor. We've known each other a little while, but this is the deepest I've been able to go with Melissa. So thank you for being here, and thanks to Outside for having us.
Yeah, thanks for doing this with me. I mean, you're somebody I admire so deeply, and it feels slightly surreal to get to share the stage with you.
Well, that's a great way to start. We had in our prep conversations, we had this really great conversation, and we both opened it up with just like, oh my gosh, like we've lived in the same town and admired each other through our sports careers for a long time. And I'd see her climbing up our local ski mountain over and over, preparing for Everest. And we knew each other, but we didn't really know each other. And what a gift that you wrote a book, because then you reached out to me and we started to get to know each other. But we started our initial phone conversation with like, you're great, no, you're great, no, you're amazing. And we both were sharing what we thought about how put together and how I thought Melissa had it all figured out and she was so determined climbing Everest. And then I read her book.
Found out I absolutely do not have it all together.
Well, we're getting to know perceptions, and I think that's a great place to start, because this is not a book about Everest. This is not a conversation about Everest, even though you heard Melissa's amazing accolades. This is about a different kind of a journey, an internal exploration that many outward explorers are often having but not talking about. And as people say, Melissa, you're so brave. You've climbed Everest without oxygen. And I know you've gotten some feedback on being brave on the book, but I want to dive into first the title. Enough, Climbing Towards a True Self on Mount Everest. And we discussed in the back, I asked you about the title, and you have a great story about it. Why did you call it this?
Yeah, before I go there, I'm just curious in this audience, without any judgment, who here has actually read the book? Okay, that just helps me understand like how embarrassed I need to be right now or not. So the book, when I knew that I wanted to write a book about my life and my story, and I also knew that I didn't want it to be a book about my achievements, because for me that was such a tiny and incomplete part of who I am. And so when I started working on this book, I had a document that was titled, "This is not a book about Everest," which was sort of like my own personal mantra to remind myself, like, Everest is the billboard that gets you to look in my direction. And it's my job to then tell the story that I most want to tell. And so all the way until 1 month before the book came out, and if you maybe are like a really big fan of mine, you may have found this out on your own, because on all the book selling sites, it was listed for sale. You could have pre-ordered it as "This is not a book about Everest," with a different title, cover art, and everything. And then my publisher really wanted me to add a subtitle, and I was like, I can only say 6 words at a time, so that's too many words already. Let's just call it Enough. And we all sort of paused and were like, why didn't we think of this before? And for me, the idea of enough is something that you don't know until you really know it. And I had to actually get through the whole process of living my life, reflecting on my life, writing it down for other people to hear, see, reflect on. And then finally, I actually could say enough. And it just felt truly right.
So when you say that word now, what do you feel in your body?
It's a wild word because it evokes a lot of emotions for me, and I don't think just because it's so important in this moment in my life, but the idea of enough is something that has always felt out of reach for me personally. You know, I was born with a really foundational idea that I could do anything and it would never be enough, both for myself and for you. And that drove me in a lot of ways, both positive and super negative. And this idea, like it gives me weirdly chills right now to think of this idea, because the counter thought that's in my brain at this moment is, but I am enough. And when I was born, 5 pounds of me at Denver General, I was enough. Like, I didn't have to do something to become it. And I truly feel like in this moment in my life, that word, it feels encompassing and like a really lovely, cozy sweater, because it's a knowingness that it isn't something that you have to go and try to learn. Like, it's within you and it's within me, and whatever we do in addition to our enoughness is sort of like the stuff of life, the sugar of life, the sweet, fun, but non-nourishing. Like, your enoughness is what nourishes you.
And it's a present word.
Yeah, it doesn't.
You're not striving to be enough. It's in the present.
Yeah, and I really, this idea, as Sierra said, like, I have done enough. I've done so much, like the most. I feel like I always have to do more, but I'm like, you already did it. You did enough. Like, it's okay. I probably still am going to go do some ridiculous things that you're going to be like, I thought you said you were enough. I'm like, I still like hard things. I like pushing myself, but it's coming from a really different place. I am enough. Like, I can truly say that I know that. And I have had enough, like, truly, of being a person who has tried to live in containers that were not my container, and trying to fit myself into the container that, whether it was, my parents held for me, or what I probably projected out into the world of my own self. of thinking I have to be this because people expect me to be this. And I can't fit into that container because it's not my container. And I have had enough of being told what I am. And, I've had enough of a lot of other things too, but we can talk about that later.
I love this idea of a container because you seem like you are this larger than life presence and your energy, and you bring energy into a room. And so I love the idea that there is no longer a container around you that you feel you have to fill.
I would describe the idea of enough is becoming amoebic, which is that you kind of get to be like, unbordered and like just in the space you're in. And it's like what I was saying before, it's this idea of being. Yeah. And it's a very lofty ideal, I think, when we talk about like Buddhism and presence. That is a really hard, like our innate selves and brains and stuff don't want us to be present because we try to like solve how to be present, and then immediately we are not being present. But it is just this idea of being. And it is an amoebic thing where you just kind of don't fit in a container because you just are I could be scientifically incorrectly talking about amoebas, but so don't.
I think we get
not a scientist. You get what I'm saying here with this?
We get it though, like borderless and sort of movable and shapeable and evolving.
Yeah, not rigid. I think that's the biggest thing. There are not right angles to our being. There are not necessarily perfectly defined borders. And it's not fixed, it's malleable, it's gonna always change. There's this luscious, beautiful aspect of being dynamic in life where nothing is fixed, the things we love especially, but the things we don't, it's all just moving constantly, and we are too.
Your identity is a mountaineer, a climber, summiter of Everest, mountain guide, and you have a quote that you talk about that you say that the summit is for the ego and the journey is for the soul. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like, I would be lying to you if I said I didn't enjoy the accolades of going. It's a really silly thing to get clapped for walking to a specific spot and standing there and then walking back, and people are like, congratulations. I'm like, thank you. And then people pay you to do that, and that's even better. But I like it. It's this external feeling of validation that I do think is actually worthwhile and important, and that's the ego, right? But I do think I don't think we have to shun away from that. And it's a little bit self-serving because I work as a mountain guide, so I help facilitate other people pursuing that. And I've always been a person, who has said, you don't have to raise money for cancer research to feel validated in wanting to climb a peak to challenge yourself and get to the summit. It's okay to just want to climb to see what you're capable of, or to go see what it looks like, or that's okay if you want to do that. That is your ego, though. So that is again the sugar of life. It's sweet, it makes you feel good for a minute, but it has no nourishment. And the journey is where all the nourishment is. That's the kale salad of it all, and that's where you're feeding yourself. Yeah. And it's actually building you into this highest self that you can be. And the journey, the beautiful part about it is it's often, not what you think it's going to be. And the summit is pretty much what you think it's going to be. I hate to tell you, if you're striving, you're I just want to go find out. It's exactly what you think it's going to be. But that's not what it's about, It's about that kale salad.
Well, that's the title of the book, Climbing Toward True Self on Mount Everest. You were climbing to a summit, but there was a lot bigger, and then you came home and you did another really big adventure that happened in stillness. And because of the pandemic, you sat down and started to journal, and you've been a writer your whole life, but what made you bring all that writing and some of those thoughts to the paper, other than that the world was shut down for a minute?
Yeah, I had time. So that was quite honestly the biggest first thing, is my guiding work was paused. All of us were in a weird, we had no idea what was going to happen. And inside of that, no idea what's going to happen, there's a lot of fear. And I'm a person that when something feels really uncomfortable, and this is probably my childhood trauma speaking, but I like to go deeper into that discomfort. And so I already was so viscerally uncomfortable with life, because I was feeling like all of us were probably feeling in some level at the beginning of COVID, of saying am I going to have work? Am I ever going to be able to take people in the mountains again? Am I ever going to be able to leave my house again? And what's going to happen? And all of these insecurities. And so I decided to do the thing that scared me the most, which was sit by myself in a room and write the truth. And putting the truth onto a piece of paper, I thought would be part of a journey. And in so many ways, it was the journey. As soon as it was out of me and on the paper, whether anybody ever read it or not, it was out of me. And I could then like walk a 360-degree circle around my mistakes, my successes, my pain, and really look at it very, very differently. And it propelled me into this incredible time of deep, deep healing. And in that healing is the sharing of this book.
So since it's been out, it's been out 4 weeks?
Yeah, like about 5 weeks maybe.
About a month.
Yeah. Time is weird.
The next part of the journey, I mean, your healing happened when you put it on the paper, as you
it started. I was an infant in healing. I'm now a toddler.
Yeah. Well, you put it out there.
Yeah.
So it was the first public expression to yourself. You were the first viewer of consuming this information, and then you decided to put it out to the world, and it's been out 4 weeks, and I've been curiously watching your Substack and your reflections on, it's very raw, it's very real, it's messy and ugly at times, and there's some really big topics in there that people don't talk about. And I'm really curious I've read some of the reviews, some of the things. I'm curious what's been coming up for you in other people's impression of it. And I don't think you wrote this book for us.
Yeah,
maybe
although
you did.
I'm like a people pleaser that likes accolades, so somewhat I must have probably.
But
if
what's
I'm
coming
honest.
up, and is it surprising you? And what are you hearing from the public and from people who are reading?
Yeah, a member of the board of the Juniper Fund, who is somebody I know well, read the book, and that's weird when you know people, or they think they know you well, and then they read the book, and they're like, "Whoa!" And he sent me a message and said, "You are complicated," and I was like, thank you. And instead I quoted that. I said, "You are complicated," with 8 laughing emojis. And I said, accurate. I am complicated. And what's really fascinating about this whole process of being really scarily, ill-advisedly honest with yourself and then the world is that I have spent my whole professional life in the public eye trying to project the image of myself that I wanted you to see. And it's not that it was untrue. Parts of it maybe were untrue, but it was wildly incomplete and it lacked context. And I knew that. So however you responded to me, the former me, not this one that you see now, but I didn't like it. So if you were like, "Wow, Melissa, you're so amazing, you've done so much, blah, 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 blah," I didn't like it. That did not feel good to me because I would feel like, no, you don't even know. I am not good. I am so bad, actually. And now I've lied to you and and then I feel all this shame and guilt. And then there's somebody saying something critical of, "Oh, she's, whatever." You could fill in the blank of all the things that you could possibly say about me. And I would take that very personally. And I wouldn't take it personally "Oh, they're right, I'm bad," but I would think, I'm bad, I'm doing a bad job at projecting this image that I want you to see. I gotta fix it. And it would become very busy then in trying to re-curate my image. And in this life right now, where I've put it all out there, and I'm, not proud of every part of my past. I really am not. And I want to be really generous to that concept of, just because I've put it in the book and I feel incredibly proud of myself for being able to get this honest, does not mean I don't have huge regrets. It does not mean I don't have pain where I have hurt people and I've shared that hurt. But it feels super different to receive feedback because it feels like it's none of my business. And that's a very high-minded idea of what people think of you is none of your business. And I never have been able to accept that because it's never been true for me. But I really can see this idea that it's okay, however you receive it. If you were like, I really hated these places and times you did things. Like a good example is not an individual reader, but a professional book reviewer. One of the very first book reviews I got wrote a really kind review about my writing and said like, she has a very beautiful writing style. This is like a debut author, which I took to heart, and that meant a lot. And then they continued on kind of unpeeling different parts of the book and said, I really wish she hadn't used her personal relationships to anchor her journey through the mountains. And it would be nice if her final summit hadn't occurred with a boyfriend. And I'm like, girl, you don't think I think that? Like, I want that to be my truth too, but it's not. Like, and my initial response was like, oh, like, they think I'm not enough, or whatever, And then it was like, no, that's okay. Like, it's okay for somebody to wish that it was a different story, and me too. There's parts of it I wish were different, but like I accept it as it is, and so I'm going through that process of, I have a really like self-deprecating sense of humor that's protective, and when people say to me, your book is really brave, my protective interior self goes, you think I'm bad and you can't believe I wrote that and told all of you, and you're saying brave as like the coded language to describe that. And then I take a step back from that and I just say, I am. Like, it is brave. It is brave to share your mistakes, and then also like the reward of, if you confront your own self, what's possible.
It makes me think a little bit about how, well, we think of when we have really big life events, like you summiting Everest without oxygen, you releasing a book. There's always sort of a before, especially in a really deep, introspective thing. There's kind of what was before and what was after. And I had that experience with a big ride that I did on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, to a physical and spiritual journey as well. And I can see me before, me after, and the shift that happens over a long period of time. So I'm curious of before the book enough, but post, all the accolades of mountaineering, when people say, you're such an inspiration. How did that make you feel at that enough, Melissa?
Like I didn't deserve it. I have always really struggled with people saying like, oh, you're so amazing, and people, especially when they say, oh, I climb, but nothing like you. And I always want to like stop and just be like, no, just like me, just like we're literally walking uphill slowly, just the same. Unless it's like Alex Honnold, then quite different, but
Fair,
similar-ish. But it's, I really felt, it's not an imposter syndrome, it's a rejection of a compliment. It's an undeservingness, right? So this thing where I don't believe I deserve to be praised because I haven't done enough or whatever. And, then to take it into now, I was telling a very good friend that the most beautiful thing for me about this book is it's the first thing in my life that I've been able to just receive the praise of. And it's not something I achieved. It's something I created. And so it feels different. It feels really different. And not just like the book I created, but, the possibility that this book could exist. And I feel deserving, I guess, of that praise, of the feedback. And the feedback has been such an incredible and eye-opening part of it all, I think, an interesting part and not what I expected.
I love this concept of creation versus an accomplishment.
Yeah.
And so how come climbing Everest isn't a creation?
I mean, I think that it's something that I did that you could do too. Like it wasn't unique to me.
Okay.
And I tried to do it in like the uniquest way possible. And it still wasn't unique enough.
Okay.
In a way.
Yeah.
And something about a creation, and I've always thought about mountaineering should be categorized more as like an art than a sport, because it's like closer in relation to coloring than it is like tennis, probably. Like in terms of our interpretation and how we express it and what have you. But and so it's it just is so exterior, where a creation is so interior in so many ways.
Yeah. So I'll share something. I was talking to Diana Nyad, who is an amazing icon in sport as well. She was here last night, and a friend, and I was interviewing her, and we talked about this concept of when people say, "Oh, you're such an inspiration," and you want to shun it off, and I resonate with that so much. And I actually asked Diana about that, and I was even telling her, like, "You're such an inspiration to me," and she flipped it for me, which is such a great concept, and I think it touches on how you're receiving the book reviews and personal reviews, is that when someone says to you that you're an inspiration, and you look at all of these amazing things you've done, it's not about you. It's actually about what you brought up in them.
Right.
And accept it. Like, it's helping me accept, like, people give compliments because of the mirror that they see, and they see something in you that excites them, and what a gift. And so if you don't receive that compliment, it actually doesn't honor what that person sees in the mirror.
Yeah. Why do you think it's hard for you to receive it?
Very much the same as what you're saying. This is why I resonate with you, and this is why my book is dog-eared, is that while this is your personal story, there was so much honesty and humanity in it, and all of us have insecurities and fears and regrets, and very few of us put them right out there to the whole world, right on paper. And you did make that choice, and I resonated. And so that's what I've been excited about with this conversation is I'm learning from you, and you are being a mirror for all of us. Did anybody see themselves a little bit in this book? Any of you who, and what a gift to give people permission to be honest with themselves.
Well, I have to tell you, so about a week before the book was officially out in the world. So some people had been reading it, and like early, readers and stuff, and I've been getting formal book reviews, and that's always weird and scary. But about a week before, I was at my peak of fear, because the train is gone from the station. I cannot get it back. And I've said what I've said, and I can't, zero takesies backsies at this moment. And I asked, I had a client who was like, I ordered the book for my 14-year-old daughter, and I was like, eek. Potentially maybe adult content in the book, as a warning, and some really big and heavy topics. And I I'm in an era of doing really ill-advised things. So I did the ill-advised thing of asking the internet for some advice about something that was really sensitive to me, which was, my book is about to come out. You all know that because I've been talking about it incessantly. And it has some really big and potentially triggering and difficult topics. What should I do? And not in a formal way, the publisher handles that, but in a personal way to sort of give a heads up to people that it's not a book about Everest, so you don't order it for your 14-year-old daughter and then be super mad at me about that. What do you think? And it was a question box on the internet, also eek. And I left that up for an hour, and then I had to delete Instagram for the rest of the day because the feedback that I got was so aggressive and shocking to me, and made me even more scared of what I'd done. I got comments like, "We're not your therapist. If it's not a book about Everest, what could your book be about?" And I literally was like, okay, I will now crawl back inside my own skin and go back to the place where I thought this was a good idea, and I will reside there until this has gone to the world and it's forgotten about, and hopefully that happens really, really soon. And it just felt so terrible. I was like, oh my gosh, what is gonna happen, And I got a really long message from a parent who was like, I have, showed you to my daughter since she was 7, she's 17. If this isn't a book I can share with my daughter, I need a clear heads up about what's in this. How am I gonna, if you aren't who you've portrayed yourself to be, essentially, it's gonna take me a lifetime to deconstruct that. So that was a really fun few days that I went through.
Wow.
Wow. People say really fun things to me on the internet. And then I kind of had to just be like, I believe very strongly that it's really important for us to be able to be honest and flawed. Because I didn't yet, in my 41 years of life, meet anybody who didn't have some flaws. And I didn't meet anybody who doesn't have some dishonesties that are hiding their flaws, big and small. And I think we're better with each other when we get to like relax a little bit and just know that, you know, a number of hands went up when I asked who read this book, and then you still came to this room.
Right.
And that means a lot to me, you know, because I did tell you that I was a different person, or, you know, I left out a lot. If you've ever been a fan of mine through the years, you might know one version, and this who I am is a very different version. And then the book came out, and all of that kind of went away, because I got to start to receive the messages of people that were really deeply impacted by somebody who they viewed, like we say this about each other, and I said it to Rebecca, Rebecca and I both lived in Ketchum, Idaho, she still lives there, for a long time, and it was the era of my life that was really the most tortured. And Rebecca, to me, in my view, embodied who I wished I could be. This like highly moral, and this is who you are. Like, you have an incredible interior compass for right and wrong. And I interpreted that as like just innate goodness. And I believed it was something that I couldn't have. And so all I could do was sort of like admire you and like stay a little bit distant, because people as good as you would know that I was not one of them. And it, you know, in this process of being so revealing, I have gotten to find out that we are all like the same person, you know, and it's, we're all dealing with our own versions of our own interior battles, and you don't have to have my history, or you don't have, like, I hope you don't make my mistakes to like learn my lessons, but we're all on that journey of being in this body on this earth right now, and you're not immune, you know. We assign this perfection to the people we admire, and I actually think the power is in removing that. And I love you more for being able to know that you're somebody who is like me, and who has insecurities and has a really strong moral compass and has also made mistakes, you know, because it gives us a permission to all be deserving in a way.
Well, and there's a couple of things I'll say to that. During that period, I remember viewing you as untouchable and perfect in another way.
AKA a B.
Untouchable and so driven and so focused and on point. And so we didn't become friends because both of us had walls up, and yet we lived in the same town. We were doing outdoor sports. And when the veil comes down, and all of you who read the book and still showed up today, now, you know, if you show your full self, a true compliment, and someone says you're an inspiration, they really mean it. They have the whole picture now.
Yeah, and you know, so I've been getting this interesting divide of feedback between like the male reader and the female reader, and I'm really fascinated by it, but I've been getting a lot of feedback from male readers that includes, I mean, a lot, like enough that I can tell you this as a category now. Saying things like, you know, I didn't have your same experiences, blah, 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 always qualifying how we're different. But I'm like, no, we're the same. And then saying, I recognize in some of your behaviors, some of my own behaviors and how those have been destructive. And I found it really powerful that you were able to admit it. And it makes me want to be a little more honest. And that's a paraphrasing of said no one, but it is the category that is super powerful to me, because that's the power of sharing, you know, our interior selves, is this idea that you empower other people to be able to tell the truth, and even to themselves. Like, the number one thing I would say is, if you are a person who struggles with knowing your own self is good enough, I think that whether you record it into a voice note on your phone or sit down at your laptop and type it out, like, tell the truth somewhere. And you don't ever have to let anybody else have that, but you get a chance to then like do what I did, of walk around it and see it very differently. And that has been really powerful. And then I have been getting a lot of feedback from women, crushingly, who have lived very similar lives to me, and have gone through, who live in very different environments, and have gone through some of the same challenges that I didn't choose, and have manifested some of the same behaviors that I did choose that became huge challenges. And they say, like, I'm so ashamed of my own behavior And when you laid it out what you did, I recognized that pattern of where it came from. And, you know, that's not okay, but it is sure nice to feel less alone. And I believe that regret can be just regret when you remove the shame, and you have to speak it out loud to remove the shame. And shame is aloneness, right? And when you find out that you're not alone, it's hard to be as ashamed, I guess.
I want to dive in a little bit into sort of
If you didn't read the book, you're probably really wondering what we're like talking about. But you can buy one out there later.
Yeah,
I'll sign it even.
Yeah, exactly. Melissa is going to have a book signing afterwards, so everyone's going to get their own copy that they can take notes in, like I did. I want to talk about gender a little bit and the male-female relationships, and what really struck me a lot in the book. I mean, you're a female mountaineering guide, which is a very small minority, especially 10, 15 years ago, as you were getting into it, and you operated with a bunch of dudes in the wilderness and owners of companies. And I really, it was an interesting concept because I could relate in some of the sports I'm in, but also in, you know, we had a panel here last year where we called it Bringing Outside Women In. Mm-hmm. And it was a bunch of women from the North Face, from REI, and all talking about why do we not see more women in the boardroom? Mm-hmm. And so it's a very similar concept of feeling out of place, not feeling like you belong, and not seeing someone like yourself in that space. And you really had to fight and claw your way to stay in there. Do you want to talk a little bit about, and maybe some of those things that you hope for the future of women in mountaineering, women in sport, women in business? Yeah. You know, how do we learn from maybe some of the decisions that you aren't the most proud of, or what you had to do to protect yourself and be there? Yeah. It's a big topic.
It is a big topic. I think it's really, I mean, probably says a lot about me that a person with like an innate belonging wound decided to try to fit in an environment where I didn't look like anybody else around me, because that probably goes into this idea of like, I didn't want to belong in a way. Like I was so believed internally or subliminally that I was going to go and prove that I didn't by putting myself in an environment where I in some ways couldn't. Yeah. You know, I could never be one of the boys. But I worked on Everest every single season from 2008 to 2016 for 9 years, and as one of the only women working on the mountain. And so that was almost 10 years ago. And so raise your hand if you think that like we've made progress and that it's better now, today, almost 10 years later. Like we have made progress, like there are more women in those top spots. This Everest season that just finished right now, it's just wrapping up, 2025, there was 0 women working on the mountain as guides. There's 4 women that work regularly as guides. And then when you get into local workers, Nepali women, that's even crazier because of many other nuanced reasons. So like there's this beautiful idea of, you know, wanting to, I had this idea, well, if I'm really honest, I just wanted to, I wanted to prove myself, and I wanted to also have the attention of being an outlier when I was 20 and I started. I liked it. It felt good to like be the one girl in the room. And there's a like really double-edged blade to that, which is that people are like, ooh, look, she's in the room, ooh. And then they're like, okay, now here's all you have to do to stay in the room. And then you're like, oh, gosh, this is crushing. But I had this idea kind of as I matured through that initial just, you know, desire to have attention. I really thought like the biggest thing I can do to change this and to make it so that there are more women is to be here. And just being here will change the landscape somewhat. Like I don't know what an all-male climb on any mountain looks like. I've never been on one. But I do know that like I've guided a heck of a lot of all dudes plus Melissa climbs. And I always am told, like, you know, it just takes one woman and it really just changes the dynamic of everything. And like gender and gender roles and like all the historic societal things play into that. And I don't think it's like so absolute and so finite and so binary. But it is interesting when you, and I think it actually applies like in a really malleable way across any outlier. Whenever you have an exceptional person in a space where everybody else is one thing and there's one other person, there's a lot of weight put on that person to create the space they want to be in and not a lot of help. and it's a huge labor. And so I really struggled. I mean, I honestly really super struggled through how to exist as one of the only women in a really male-dominated space. And I struggled with some really basic human things, like how easy it was to get attention and how good that felt, and the really like toxic and destructive sides of that. And then I struggled with not being taken seriously at all. I just found out really recently that like a climber who I really respect said something about like I was excluded from a list of historic climbers. And this person of great respect, whose name I won't say, but you all know them, said like, she's not a real climber. And that's today. That was said today. Like, I don't know what I have to do, you know, to be able to become a real climber. And I think that that is a gendered idea in the particular space I'm in. And I do a lot of public speaking, and sometimes I'll walk onto the stage and I'll ask everybody, you know, I come like this, so I'm wearing this outfit. I am this person who lives in this container. And I say, you know, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine a mountaineer. And I want you to imagine a high altitude mountaineer who's climbed Everest, who's done it 6 times, who's done it without oxygen, who has a 20-year career guiding people in the mountains. I want you to, with your eyes closed, imagine the shape of their hands, the hunch of their body, how they stand, and open your eyes. And I bet you're not imagining me. But that is who I am. And me being that, I hope, is helping just create like a little era of permission for everybody who wants to do it behind me. But it's really complicated, and I want to give credit to like why there was no women guiding on Everest this year, and how, you know, we as a society, and really a global society, assign women like a very particular responsibility of like child rearing and raising and making in their most like productive work years as well. And it's really frowned upon. I get annihilated on the internet constantly because I have little kids and I work as a mountain guide. And my husband, we talk about it all the time. Like, he also works as a mountain guide. And I can like laugh my hate away about it, where I say like, how many comments do you get on the internet about like, I can't believe you're a mountain guide with little kids, that's so irresponsible? And he's like, huh? No one's ever said that to me. And I'm like, literally once a week somebody jumps into my DMs to tell me how, when will it be enough? Do I have to stop risking my life and potentially leaving my children without parents? And it's like, that's a very internalized misogyny that we're pushing on women. Well, other chat, probably.
Yeah, and here's where being there and being present and being in the room isn't enough. As we're seeing, what is the next level, the next step is mentorship of women and girls, which you and I are both doing. It's talking about that exact topic to your husband, and him being like, huh? I've said stuff to my husband too, and like, does this ever happen to you? And he's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And we've been in bike races together where we happen to be, I'm faster than him often, or we're together, and he's great, and we'll do 24-hour races. And he noticed we were in a race in South America, and the men wouldn't let me pass. Yeah. And he's like, what's going on? I'm like, this happens to me all the time. And he's like, wow. And so being in the room isn't enough, but you're talking about it, writing a book about it, articulating it, is starting to be enough.
Well, and I've started, like, I stole this idea from somebody else in a different professional atmosphere, but she was saying how every time she's working away from home, somebody will say to her, like, who's watching your kids? And no one ever says that to her husband, and she had this idea, like, I think I'm going to start doing it. And so I've started doing it all the time to my male peers that I work with who have kids. I'm like, who's watching your kids while you're working? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, who's watching you're working, so who's watching your kids? They're like, my wife, their mom. I'm like, oh, cool. And then just leave that there, because that's just there.
This language is so important. I just came from a workshop, and it was about fitness and wellness and owning your life. And one of the co-facilitators was giving an example about the NBA. Mm-hmm. And the other female instructor with me, her language was great. She's like, oh, is that the men's version of the WNBA? Yeah. And the instructor, who's amazing, he was like, you know what? I'm really glad you said that. Yeah. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. And so often culture is not meant to be vindictive. It just is. And so being there isn't enough, but talking about it starts to be more.
Yeah, and I want to just also address like this thing that you said, that we realize we need to like be in this space as mentors. And I can say with great certainty that one of my biggest regrets in my professional life is that I spent most of my time working as one of the only female mountain guides, giving whatever vibes I gave you at Atkinson's in the grocery store to like every other girl that came across and maybe was going to be a new guide. I definitely did no favors to them to make them feel welcome, because they were a threat to me, again, because like some really deep societal things of like, if there's two women, there's not ever going to be a single Everest expedition that's going to hire two women unless it's an all women's Everest expedition. I hope that before I die, you all can like play this reel for me and be like, haha, because that would be great. But I don't think it's going to happen. And so if you are two women, you are in competition for the job, and it's so insidious. And my life really started to change in that way when I started to see the true, real value of mentoring in a different way. So like I think as a dominant female, and this is something I deeply admire about you and I always have, is that you have not been a figure for women bikers to admire. You are a figure for, I'm using the wrong terminology. What do I say? Mountain bikers, cyclists, all the people.
Cyclists.
Yes. What is your proper terminology? Cyclists to admire. And you put on clinics and races, and you don't put on women's races. And something that felt really important to me watching sort of the guiding in the mountains was that I understand the need for affinity spaces and how sometimes the point of access is essential to get through that comfort. Yeah. But when I started mentoring people, and some of my mentees were young girls, one of the first things I said was, it's imperative to me that I and you can be comfortable in a mixed gender environment, because that is actually going to change things far faster than making you really good at guiding all women, that making you really good at putting on women's mountain bike races, because it others it. That's the thing. It's like we just have to constantly, and I don't know what the advantage, again, like it's a really colonialized societal issue of why women high altitude mountaineers aren't really a thing. And I was just thinking about it today when I was thinking about this year and the guides and the 3 other female guides who have worked more than one season. There's some other guides who have worked just a single season, female guides, but there's 4 of us who've worked multiple seasons, and the other 3 don't have children. And it's, again, like it's confusing and complicated, because I don't think it's okay that we assign that as like women's value, because there's so many complicated relationships with having children, and that is not your value as a woman, but if you choose that, it shouldn't take away the value of you pursuing your own self as well. Like we should be able to, do some of all of it.
I want to use our last few minutes to talk a little bit about, in the response to the book, the first Substack article that I read that was really beautiful, and you've since written a second one. The first one you talked about, and so I'd like to touch on both of them. You talked about what you lost in this adventure of putting your true self out there and writing the book enough, and you went through some of the things you lost. And we have choices in any small or big decision or action. We gain and we lose something. So I'd love for you to play on and talk about what you've lost and maybe what you've gained. And then there's a second half. You gave a teaser in your article of like, tune in next week, and I haven't read that one yet. So I would love for you to sort of close us out with those sentiments.
Yeah, I think that week before my book came out, that really scary week, I was really afraid of all I was about to lose. I was afraid that, again, like all the people that responded to that little question box were gonna be everybody. And I was afraid that my best friend was going to read the book and decide not to be my best friend anymore. And I lost that with the book. It came out, and I lost that fear because my best friend like held me tighter. And I lost this, I shared in the Substack, and I'm sorry if you read it and this is repetitive, but somebody left a review, which I'm not supposed to be reading those because it's really bad for my mental health, but I like to do really hard things. But she wrote, this was supposed to be called This Is Not a Book About Everest, and maybe it should have been about Everest because it just reads like a mean girl's diary and lacks the compassion of other books in its genre. And I was like, oh God. My initial response was like, oh, that's rugged. And then my next response, which surprised me more than anybody else, was, wow, I bet somebody like me really hurt her. And I hope that she can heal from that. And it went away. Until I wrote about it, I didn't think about that feedback again, which is very unlike me, not to really ruminate on it and make it my whole identity. So that was a huge surprise. I lost this intense self-criticism, and I lost this expectation that you think I'm bad, or that you're waiting for a reason to hate me, and I'm just giving you that. And so that was the first part of it, was sort of these really beautiful things that I got to shed, which were really things I gained, right? It was things I gained from being my true self, is that I don't have to uphold somebody else for you. I just can be me, and you can take it or not, and you will inevitably like parts and not like other parts, and that is the experience of being a person in the world and perspective. And the second part of it, which you haven't read, which is a lot harder and really, really tough for me, is that I talk about in the book sort of my foundational wounds and a really challenging relationship with parents, and particularly my mother. And I've had a really complicated relationship with them for my whole life. And I really imagined that I would give them this book and that they would take this time to read it and say, wow, I never have known you, and now I understand so much more. And that's not what happened, I will just say. And I have a complete estrangement from my birth parents, and by my choice also, I will be clear. And a really tough realization that I have spent my whole life hoping that I could contort myself in some particular way, get to some singular summit that would make me acceptable. And there's this idea in Buddhism that is about hope. And it's the idea that hoping for the future is like grabbing a flame. It's both impossible and very painful. And I really had to just realize that has been my experience, and it's time to have that funeral of hope. And that feels sad, but it's also really, really liberating and really, really beautiful in some ways. And I don't know what the future exactly holds, but that's sort of the flip side of it all.
Well, and that word liberation in both those stories, what I love about that, when I started this podcast, the story that inspired me was when Michelangelo was asked about creating the statue of David. He was asked, well, how did you do this? And Michelangelo said, I just removed everything that wasn't David. And your first part, your liberation, is shedding the things you don't need. And then also trying not to hold a flame that isn't, and letting go of the pain that, of something that you don't have. And what an honor to talk to you, and what an honor to be able to have a live audience here. I can feel your energy, and when everyone raised their hands about the book, reading the book, it's a real gift to spend this time with you. And my hope is that you'll take the book, and put some dog ears and some notes, and see it as a mirror into your soul. And what do you hope for this experience for everyone today?
Yeah, I have so much gratitude to anybody who has spent any time here with us today, but listening, with reading the words, taking them in, and to bring it to this incredible serendipity of life. I have this internal question, my origin question of am I enough? But it really started with something else, which is, am I good? And to be able to share the stage with Rebecca, who, if you don't know, a very foundational and highly important thing is be good. And I think that is what I hope everybody can leave here with, is this idea of be good and enough.
And you are enough.
Together.
I think that's great. An action item, be good, and you are enough, as you are here sitting today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Hey, It's a long and dusty road and a hot and heavy load. Folks I meet ain't always kind. Some are bad, some are good, some have done the best they could. Some have tried to ease my troubling mind. And I can't help but wonder where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Can't help but wonder where I'm bound.